Hey there, welcome to episode 62 of the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program. I am your host, Managing Director of the Innovate for Vegas Foundation, Dan Hugo. We're recording episode 62 on this, the Friday, the final Friday of April 26th, in fact, 2024. Today's topic, today's title, Differential Progress Units. If you remember from your calculus days, a differential unit is very, very tiny. So we can measure progress in differential units. The smaller, the better. And then we'll integrate them over a continuous timeline. Anyway, a quick update. As I've mentioned about 2 episodes ago, we're going to try to focus on progress rather than aspiration. So these are progress, although I really want to have something to deploy in the next couple of days, so we'll look at that. If all goes to plan, my episode 63 will be more of a, hey, check this out. So, a couple of weird things, not a couple, just one weird thing, though, that has led to a small pivot, and I shall read my summary, and we can begin. The other shoe has dropped with HashiCorp. They recently went public right after they announced a change in their license terms for a point in time on all of their products moving forward. So up until that point, if you're not familiar with how this works, up until that point, there's a license that's fairly permissive so that people could build projects and make use of the sources and whatnot for the HashiCorp products like Terraform and Vault, Console, Vagrant, Packer. I'm just listing these off from memory. After that point, you can't do that. This is it's a business source license. So still can get the sources, can't build your products on them. This is sort of protectionist so that they could go public, which they did. And then there was an announcement that they were in talks with IBM. I'll get into this more, but so that those talks have now been announced. So the other shoe is a $35 per share acquisition of HashiCorp by IBM. IBM also acquired Red Hat. With the recent announcement, which has made the decision to switch to Pulumi a little bit easier for this update today. Not to mention our leaning in completely to using old methods to engage our colleagues across the distal tapestry of civic volunteerism. Those are the people that are far away from Vegas. You remember, you don't have to innovate in Vegas to innovate for Vegas. So I will describe all of those things, maybe more. But first, wherever you found this audio program, I hope they've also shared with you the episode description, which includes some links for today. In the future, I spoke about this in another episode of another show I do called Cafe Genius Impresarios. So this week's episode, I spoke about starting a media company, which will be based quite heavily on the MyMuni project, as well as Smart Social, Open Data Capture, etc. So one of the components of this project, which will be about information sharing in a smarter smart city, is discovering and researching, if you like, content creators in your city. So in this case, the greater Vegas area. There I went to a podcaster meetup from Pod Squad on April 15th, met a bunch of fellow podcasters whom I had never seen before, which was nice. It's nice to see new people being entrepreneurial in different ways, which if you get stuck talking to the same 100 people every month, not as productive nor as interesting. So this just underscores the point, though, that discovering people who are doing interesting things is tricky. Local media doesn't always cut it. Social media is very algorithmic. So part of the plan for MyMuni, which especially Smart Social, is to make it a little bit easier to discover and connect. And no small part of that will be finding your local podcast hosts, your local YouTubers, your local Instagrammers, etc. So people who are doing things, their choice of platform is theirs. I'm not judging that, but the fact is they're doing something. They're doing something interesting in many cases. And sometimes you rely completely and totally on an algorithm to help you discover. Why not make it a little bit easier to connect people in our hood, in our communities, in our greater Vegas area, to people who might be interested in what they're doing, but maybe they're not using Instagram. Maybe Instagram is not gracious enough to share these interesting people with you if you're using Instagram or YouTube, etc. So happenstance is nice. It's hard to rely on. So yeah, finding podcasts, shows, podcasters, content creators is a thing I want to focus on. But the point was that you don't always get the full episode description in a nice readable form. I post in HTML. HTML and RSS is kind of broken. It always has been. So part of what we want to accomplish is being able to find nice looking, easy to read episode details and so on. So all that said, hopefully you can see these links. The first two, as usual, Innovate for Vegas Foundation website, innovateforvegas.org, and our GitHub organization, github.com/innovateforvegas. No spaces. I have a link to the IBM press release. HashiCorp also had one, but I don't really link to IBM too much. IBM acquires HashiCorp, so you can read in the newsroom on IBM.com. IBM also, somewhat famously, I suppose, acquired Red Hat. So it will be interesting to see what IBM does here moving forward, especially in light of the license changes and some other stuff that has come around. The relationship between HashiCorp and OpenTofu project from Linux Foundation became contentious recently. Some finger pointing. I talked about this a couple of episodes ago. When it first kind of hit the news, and maybe some false accusations, maybe some drama, maybe coupled with this announcement. Who knows? Who knows? This is one reason to sort of back away quietly, perhaps. I have linked to, in case you're curious or you've never heard of these things, or maybe you have, I've linked to the terraform.io website, which is a HashiCorp property. I've linked to the opentofu.org website, which is a fork of the Terraform project. So as I intimated, when you fork a project, you pick a point in time, or in this case, a point in their commit history that was under the permissive license, and you say, I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to start a new project from this project. And we're going to keep the old licenses. I haven't actually looked at what OpenTofu is using, but either the same license or something compatible. So we're going to keep the Terraform dream alive as OpenTofu with open source, and you can build actual products on it, etc. So if you were considering building tools on top of Terraform and you got thwarted by this license change, the OpenTofu project is there for you. Otherwise, I believe the aim is to make them compatible if you are merely using the tools. And you can continue to use Terraform, but for this IBM thing. So that's my concern. So Pulumi as well, Pulumi.com. Pulumi.com is another option. There are a few options now for infrastructure as code, which, by the way, is what all these are about. So you hear a lot of talk about AWS and maybe not as much about Azure, the Microsoft cloud offering. You maybe hear even slightly less about Google's offerings, maybe a lot less about Oracle's offerings, etc. So there's a lot of cloud business going on. And as a developer, as an infrastructure engineer, as a DevOps engineer, as a whatever your role and titles are, you have to set these things up. It's like building anything. It's like a recipe for a cake or whatever. Right? You need to say, I need a server, I need a router, you can configure routes. I need a load balancer, I need an SSL cert, I need a DNS record configured, I need a database, I need persistent storage, I need containers, all the list goes on. I need a real-time data capture stream, the list goes on, caches and event streams, all these things that you can assemble much like Legos. And so you write some code to assemble all these things. Reproducible infrastructure, always nice. Unchangeable, what is it? what is the word? It's when you're not supposed to change, you avoid drift if you don't change your infrastructure a lot. Immutable, thank you. Immutable infrastructure can be coded up and then committed to stone tablets, perhaps. Anyway, so Pulumi, I'll get into that. It's been around for a long time, not as long as Terraform, but it might be a time as good as any to explore that. As well as I found out, the OpenTofu Terraform pair, you basically run it locally. If you're going to do anything of size, you probably want to use the Terraform Cloud, which is something you end up paying for. I haven't checked in a while, but I don't recall at the time if there was a Terraform tier, cloud tier for nonprofits, public charities, etc., open source projects. I could look, except that I've sort of made this decision for now. Nothing is set in stone, despite what I said earlier about tablets. So I still have my infrastructure that I wrote in Terraform that is kind of current, as I'll describe later. I did this a while ago. So Pulumi actually has a specific open source free tier of their team cloud offering. There's 10 seats, and I'll get into this later as well. So I've linked to the page on the Pulumi website that details this. And I generally like to be supportive of organizations that are supportive of organizations like ours. We're doing open source. We are a public charity. We're a 501c3 public charity, in fact. Is there any other kind? There's a lot of 501a types, and I don't remember the number. It's like 15 or 20 or something. So we are an actual determined 501c3, properly named as of March, the Innovate for Vegas Foundation. So when I reach out to Pulumi and say, hey, can we get 10 seats under this open source? And they're just for open source projects. So when I reach out as a charity, hopefully they'll just say, yes, of course. So the idea would be if we have civic volunteer project contributors who would like to explore the joys of infrastructure, we can use the Pulumi tools for our projects, and we could also, at the same time, use OpenTofu, and anyone learning in this space could learn both. They could learn the pros and cons of a declarative versus procedural approach to managing infrastructure, although Pulumi does support YAML, so it's a little bit closer to declarative. But HCL, the HashiCorp configuration language, I think it is somewhat annoying, and I'll wander into that topic a little bit later. And finally, Ollama. I've linked to the Ollama, O-L-L-A-M-A, Oyama.com website, and I'll talk about that at the end. So let's get started so we can get on with our Friday. Infrastructure as code. I mentioned last week that we need to have a deployable infrastructure defined so that if and when people join projects, they find it easier to figure out what we have. You can automatically diagram a configured infrastructure so you can see right away what goes where, which servers, which accounts, which VPCs, virtual private clouds, which peering connections between VPCs, between accounts, et cetera, et cetera. So being able to view the code that configures an infrastructure is useful just out the gate from a documentation standpoint. You don't have to go spelunking around through a user interface. If you've ever used the AWS or Google, I've never really used the Azure GUI, the web interface for their configurations, but it just gets to be kind of a pain. If you have anything of size, it gets really fun. So you can, and once you have a starting point, you can reproduce that. You can build up the same infrastructure somewhere else, certainly in the same cloud provider. If you've put in some extra effort, maybe across in the multi-cloud, which is going to become the rage, which is apparently why IBM is acquiring HashiCorp. Multi-cloud for the win. I told a story about a project I worked on, I think it was 2 weeks ago, where they did not have their infrastructure implemented in code form. They had assembled all of the pieces of their project through the GUI, through the graphical user interface of the website for AWS. So when I asked questions, because I prefer, for what should be obvious reasons if you're a developer, I prefer having infrastructure as code. I think most people would. So rather than saying, "Oh, okay, I see where everything is," it was, "Well, we configured it in the web user interface." So in order to reproduce their infrastructure, like to have a duplicate for debug and test as a separate auditing platform and so on, to do any of that thing, you'd have to start from zero and manually, and then you don't know for sure if you're ending up with the same thing. So infrastructure as code is a reasonably good idea. It's like typing in machine code instructions as you might have in the 60s, or if you had a hobby computer in the 70s. Typing in the OS every time you turn it on, you might make a mistake. So store that code, make it reproducible, and make it immutable. Why not? So it's always the same and doesn't change mysteriously. They call that drift, or worse. So the big gorilla in the room when it comes to this has been HashiCorp and their Terraform application, and now platform. This started off as a Terraform tool. Now it's Terraform Cloud, and a ton of providers and plugins and all this stuff, which recently went through some licensing changes, as I mentioned, and upset the open source community. I'm kind of on the, a business has to be able to pay their employees and so on. So I'm inclined to view this as bad planning at the time. Bad planning, like, oh, we're not going to be able to survive like this. You could be a little bit more transparent up front and say, hey, we are making this really important thing and we're not able to survive without some sort of, donations. They should form a foundation. Really the way to go, in my opinion. And I'm not saying this because we're the Innovate for Vegas Foundation, but if you start a foundation or if you start some sort of a charity entity, and it's multiple companies that have a stake in something, and if you look at the Postgres project, PostgreSQL, if you can include other companies or other interests in the governance, but also in the sustainability of a project like that, Postgres has become, one of the top, most critical, I guess, most important, most widely used database projects, or really any project. And part of the upside of that is it's unlikely that a single player would be able to say, okay, we're changing the license for Postgres. You can look at the history of MySQL if you want to see how that goes down, and then how it became the MariaDB. So MySQL, I think it's MariaDB, MariaSQL. I believe MySQL is named after the person who started the project, and the maintainer had a son, like Milo maybe, and then daughter Maria, something like that. So there was I'm totally reaching back in time, but the point is, if you rely on one company for your tools and then they have to make a change, they can either be transparent about it and try to sustain the product, or they can make a pure business decision, which looks to be the case here. So that's harder to get behind, my opinion. So the Linux Foundation is actually backing the pre-license change fork, like I said, of Terraform. It's called OpenTofu. And I think it was 2 weeks ago I talked about how there was a news headline, a little bit inside baseball, that the OpenTofu project was being accused, and I think they were pointing at a specific developer, a contributor to the project, was being accused of copying and pasting in some code in the new license the changed licensed source tree for Terraform. And so that it turned into a kerfuffle. And so there's some people speculating that it had to do with this IBM stock acquisition, $35 per share. So it was like flexing a little bit in public to show the potential buyer, and now the announced acquirer of HashiCorp, like, hey, look, we're defending our IP and we're flexing our muscles. Don't know, who can say? But either way, kind of got a little bit ugly right out the gate. I mean, OpenTofu has only been alive, and I think they released about 2 months ago their first fork that's building separately. They have a website and everything. So the bottom line, Terraform, OpenTofu, IBM, Linux Foundation, it's getting a little tense. It'll be interesting to see how things go. Things got weird because I started using Terraform at version 0.11 It may have been right before that. It was before the major gigantic, like you have to migrate your HCL to the new world. So it might have been like 0.09 or 0.9. Yeah, 0.09 probably. So it was right before the major gigantic, huge language migration that had to take place. So it was right in the like 0.11, but it was a long time ago in internet years. Now they are at version 1.8.2, I think. I think I have 1.8.1 installed. It's a lot of releases. So version numbers are fun, but 0.11, 0.12, 0.13, I think they were going with the, I don't know if they're using, what is the I can't remember the name of it, but the versions where you do a major minor patch and there's compatibility implications, which that's basically what they're doing. Semantic versioning. Thank you. So version 1.8 is many, many revisions later, and that's a lot of change and a lot of work has gone into it. So lots of changes since I first learned their HCL. HCL, HashiCorp configuration language, I think is annoying. It is not awful. One of the things right away, which was annoying specifically, was they didn't really have a way to loop. You couldn't say, give me 5 EC2 instances. So they eventually added count. So you could have a count variable. You'd say, oh, for a count, there's going to be 5. So now you're going to have an array of values. It got to be a little bit hacky. Kind of has a PHP feel to it. Not a PHP fan. So, okay, HCL, if you are familiar with declarative languages, it was not quite the lift to learn it. I came from the XSL days. I wrote XML transform. Oh, I'm sorry, XSL. Yeah, XSLTs. X style sheet language transformations, XSLT. So you declare transformation rules, etc. So declarative programming is not a huge thing if you've already done it, but HCL is not for the faint of heart to get started. And yeah, so once you've gone through the hassle of learning it, you might as well stick with it, right? Because everybody else is using Terraform. It's become sort of the industry standard, the gorilla in the room. I don't like it, but it can work. And they've added a few features, like I said, so you can now parameterize, like I said, give me 5 servers, set up 2 of these, set up 2 VPCs, and you can pass it a dictionary or a hash, whatever it is, a map of parameters and so on. So sure, I've described it as though it was procedural, but left for the listener. Check it out. The license change raised a lot of ire in the community, which these always do. If you look at the Redis situation as well, Redis just kind of did the same thing recently in the interest of commercial concerns, business, finance, sustainability of the company, paying people, those nice things. And again, I don't know if I've said this recently. One of the things I like to say about the Innovate for Vegas Foundation, civic volunteer project contributors of creative works, I don't want you to work for free, but I want you to be willing to work for free. So including a plan to pay people and to be transparent with people and potential customers, clients, collaborators, people who are building on your work. You say, hey, we want to keep this going. We want to be supportive of the people who have made us successful. In order to do that, we need to somehow generate some kind of revenue or some sort of donations or some sponsorship scheme or something. But if you just pull the rug and change your license and people feel screwed over, then wait for it. The Linux Foundation is backing the Valkey, Valkey, as in key value store, which Redis is. They're backing the Valkey project. So you can see a pattern forming. There have been other cases. So once you change your license and people feel screwed over, the option to take your open source software from before you change your license and fork it and basically compete against you is real. And, fun fact, Microsoft bought the Spyglass software to make the initial Internet Explorer. Well, the Spyglass software was an acquisition of the HTTP web browser from NCSA at Brown and Champaign, which was where the Netscape developers first developed it. So essentially, the Internet Explorer got started as a fork of sorts, different politics at the time, but as a fork of the Netscape project. So interesting things start to happen when these, and all of that happened because NCSA claimed ownership of the work done and so on. So it gets a little hairy. The fact that all the source code is available in open source projects makes it interesting. It's a different chess game, I think. Anyway, IBM and HashiCorp have just announced recently that IBM is buying HashiCorp for their multi-cloud strategy. IBM also acquired Red Hat a while back, and that has been a little bit weird. Red Hat has done some things that have annoyed people around some of the releases that were built on top of Red Hat or Fedora. I think it was Red Hat. CentOS, is that one of them? I don't know. I've been Debian forever. But bottom line, castle intrigue. So this is all kind of concerning. Is Terraform going to go away? Probably not. Is Terraform going to become more commercial? Probably. Is it going to be less open source? Maybe. Maybe not. Is it going to return to the previous license and be yet more open source as it once was? Maybe. Who can say? So the fact that the Open Tofu project still exists and will presumably continue to do so is reassuring. However, I'm not really a fan of HCL. I think I'm kind of over it, even though I have a ton of HCL that I have created, which I will mention in a moment. So the project, Pulumi project, has been around for a few years. It came out, I didn't look at the years, but it came out many releases in on Terraform. And they said, hey, rather than writing a bunch of code in this goofball declarative language, why don't you use the languages that you already use? So they support C#, Python, TypeScript, and one more that I'm not remembering. And then YAML, I think is newer. So YAML, I don't remember it's not yet another markup language. It's something else, but YAML is becoming very popular. YAML is a superset of JavaScript. So if you're a JSON person, then YAML is all that and more. So you can write out your configuration for Pulumi as a big giant YAML file. There are some good things about that. However, you're kind of sliding back into the declarative scheme. That may not be bad. I haven't tried Pulumi YAML yet, so we'll see. But if you can write some code in a more procedural form that you're more familiar with, and from what I understand, I'm literally just getting started on this today, so that's why it's differential progress units. So transitioning, I'll basically take my implementation as it was designed. I had a similar paradigm. I was using stacks, so you would have a driver for the particular AWS, in this case, AWS resource would be wrapped in a driver. So that was all the declarations with variables and so on. Then you would build a system of coupled drivers. So if you're going to create a DNS Route 53 for AWS, if you're going to create an AWS domain record, the system would be the domain record, and then the different entries for MX and A. You could connecting it to an elastic load balancer. So here's the thing: the ELB or the load balancer, any load balancer, you can connect the Route 53 routing. So if the addresses change, the load balancer will be properly configured to accept traffic on the addresses and so on. And then if you take advantage of the free SSL certs that Amazon offers, you can attach that to the load balancer, so that you can use, the load balancer will serve HTTPS. It will answer on port 443. So you have a load balancer, you have a SSL cert management, the AWS Certificate Manager, ACM, I think it is. You have your DNS, Route 53, and then you have your, routes, SSL cert. So those are three different components that all fit together. So there's the load balancer system, there's the ACM interface system, right? So there'd be a few resources as far as confirming your domain ownership, etc. And then your DNS. So those are three different systems that would then be lumped together into possibly a stack. That's how I was kind of abstracting this stuff. So a stack would then be movable. So you could have a stack over here, and then if you said, oh, I want to have another domain record service, a different domain with a different load balancer and a different certificate, you would take that entire stack and make another one. And then the stacks could exist in layers. So you would layer stacks on top of each other. I think I still have layers. I think I was going to transition away from that. Then I was going to add a thing called a plane, like a back plane, a control plane. So the network plane for a public facing infrastructure would include internet gateway, so you could actually have access to the public internet, the load balancer, the domain name, DNS services, Route 53. So you'd have all the public facing, externally accessible components on a plane. That plane could exist before anything else, and then you would not touch that plane, the sort of internet access plane, I guess. And then you could have a control back plane where you'd set up all of your IAM, identity access management stuff. You could set up a console, like an SSH port, listening for access from a known address, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So all these things I've worked through over the years and played with and experimented with. Can I do all those things in Pulumi? Well, today I certainly can. I was reading about it last night, and they've essentially reached feature parity, from what I understand, from what it looks like. We don't need anything too crazy to get the ball rolling. So for our needs, feature parity, piece of cake. And then we can go from there. So we can now configure our systems using multiple of their supported languages. So if anyone joins a project and they really want to do TypeScript, which is sits on top of JavaScript, of course. Okay. So Pulumi enables a polyglot, a multiple language implementation of infrastructure as code. So that's fine. And then we can look at how the YAML stuff fits into that and go from there. So it seems like a reasonable choice also to have an alternate. So OpenTofu will persist, and there are people that already have gone through the pain of learning HCL. So those people are out there. There's a lot of community. A lot of people have done things in their own way. Like in the early days, trying to figure out how to do, like, how can you set up two or more of a thing? And there was no count or for looping. So people had to get creative. There are some things about HCL and Terraform in general that are a little weird, and people have learned what works for them, and they would share that, and there's always a different take. And then there's like TerraGrunt and some other like, here's how we do it. And then they've created this platform that uses the Terraform tools and approach with, workspace management and keeping it dry, do not repeat yourself, and so on. So everybody's got a slightly different variation on a theme. Those can all continue, I suppose, using OpenTofu, depending on how licenses affect them, et cetera, et cetera. So Pulumi has kind of gone their own way. They have an open source platform. They're using readily available languages. There is a sizable community of Pulumi people now, and who knows, this may grow now that the Terraform, HashiCorp, IBM kerfuffle is in full swing. So Pulumi is like an equally usable, different approach to something that will be a valid and valuable job skill for people who join in and participate in our projects, and who maybe want to learn about that or have already learned some and want to continue, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Another cool thing, on doing some research, I found that Pulumi, and I don't know when this was true, I may have discovered this and then forgotten it, but they offer a 10-seat Teams tier license, I guess. That's a usage license, I guess, of their cloud service. So 10 seats, 10 people, 10 humans, gratis, free for open source projects. This is as simple as we're building OpenTofu and we want to use Pulumi, and they'd be like, okay, you're good. The question, and then there are a few companies that do this. For example, we have a free tier of GitHub Teams, which means we get a lot of free stuff, which is very nice. Thank you, GitHub. Thank you, Microsoft, I guess. We have a free tier of Canva. And so companies that want to be supportive of open source or public charities or both, Canva offers a free tier for a 501c3. GitHub offers a free tier for open source projects, but the fact that we're a 501c3 was a no-brainer. They said, okay, done, check mark. So when you have those options available so easily, when they're right up front, even Google has Google for nonprofits, a misnomer. You have to go through TechSoup and you have to be a 501c3. So even though they say nonprofit, which is a state designation, they really mean you must be a 501a organization. You must be a tax-exempt, determined 501c3. And you are only offered this free tier of Google Workspace for nonprofits, misnomer, after you are determined. So they will not grant you any sort of credits if you've been paying before you receive your determination for the IRS. So that's a minor annoyance, but that's the way it is. I guess you can't argue too much about free stuff. But all that said, Pulumi does offer this free tier. I don't remember seeing something similar for Terraform. I've always used Terraform running locally with state stored in what do you call it? What's the document database? Totally spacing. Anyway, so because it supports a lot, the Terraform state stuff is kind of annoying. But if you're going to collaborate with other people, or if you want to have, develop in multiple locations instead of just your laptop, so to be able to manage your state of your different infrastructure deployments is useful if you use DynamoDB. Why they don't, the OpenTofu and Terraform will also continue to have issues with storing secrets in the state. So storing IAM credentials, database passwords, anything like that you either on purpose or accidentally make visible in state files. You have to make sure who has access to state files. So it's not trivial. So we'll see how Pulumi handles that stuff. And their cloud support, which would be for free for open source projects, and hopefully it will be equally or more free for an entire 501c3 organization dedicated to open source projects. So I will check that out once we get up and running. Their terms are fairly easy. You have to make your Pulumi configuration also open source and visible, and you have to communicate with Pulumi every 90 days. That seems reasonable. So probably to say yep, still works. So this is, and at the bottom line, this is another reason to support. If you're an open source contributor or organization, you have open source projects, to me, it makes sense to be supportive of others offering open source tools, projects, offering some transparency about how they're functioning and so on. Redis, and by the way, the Redis founder left the company, he got acquired by what is now Redis. That was the naming history of the Redis, and the organization that bought it is another headache. The original founder of HashiCorp left a while ago. Maybe that's a pattern too, but I think if you are an open source person and you appreciate the whole universe that is, being supportive and making use of makes sense. So if Pulumi works out, it looks pretty straightforward. I'm eager to dive in there so I can get past this milestone. I will happily add Pulumi to our new website with the companies and entities that are supportive of nonprofit / public charity / open source project organizations such as ours. That would be cool. So there will still be opportunities to make use of OpenTofu, however, and as I said, I have this pile of infrastructure for configuring all manner of peering requests and response from VPCs across accounts, and setting up database instances and caching and persistent storage and certs and Route 53 records and all the little different components. So total, life-changing if you've ever had to deal with that stuff in the graphical user interface of the website console for something like AWS. So to be able to configure that stuff in code and do it once and save it and see changes, and I don't know why anyone would not do that. So if it's even easier or a little bit more intuitive, a little bit more shallow a learning curve to be able to use a language you already know rather than learning HCL and its quirks. Why not? So enough about infrastructure as code. Although I do, when I finish and publish this audio program, I need to get back on that. So let's get on with this episode. Project ACT. So I've mentioned this before. I think I did an entire episode on Project ACT, the Autonomous Cohort Transformation Project. It was conceived when Code for Vegas Foundation was getting into a little disagreement with the Code for America organization. Some other brigades were asking, how come Code for Vegas gets to be an independent 501c3? Indeed. So we started talking about helping other brigades if they wanted to break away from Code for America and become autonomous. So autonomous cohort transformation, transform your cohort into an autonomous entity, right? Things to be concerned about, not as an attorney or a legal consultancy, but here's what worked for us. Here are some questions we had, some answers we found, etc. And most importantly, to connect the different cohorts so that there is a communication, a discussion forums of sorts. Code for America made a Code for America Slack platform available for all of their brigades to participate in. And as things have turned out, as they have sunset the entire brigade infrastructure, they've removed access to this Slack resource. They've slacked on Slack. They removed people or access by people to the Slack if you were in the brigade infrastructure. So you're losing connectivity with your peers in the brigade environment, I guess. So that seems to be a problem in general. So we were discussing Project ACT before, and I wish I had not I deleted the GitHub organization because it didn't seem like anyone was interested. Should have left it because it had the date stamp, of course. But Project ACT and the associated GitHub organization that we have, which I will link to that once. I'll do a whole episode on progress on this, which I'm going to describe right now. So I'll link to that in a future episode directly. But it's Project ACT, Project-ACT, ACT, is the organization on GitHub. And it's a child of the Innovate for Vegas Foundation. So it's managed by me and our DevOps and so on. So the Autonomous Cohort Transformation Project has a second meaning. So we discussed this before. The second meaning is I'm getting ahead of myself. The Autonomous Cohort Tessellation, which is a mosaic. Now, in the interim, ACT, the Alliance of Civic Technologists, about which I've also spoken in previous episodes, is basically a loose and not totally coherent, I don't know, I don't want to be mean, group of former brigades, the people who are still interested in continuing efforts without the brigade infrastructure to try to recreate that. So the ACT people, they have a Discord server, ACT. They have a website, which I have linked to before, and I will in the future as we get Project ACT really up and running. So the ACT Discord, the ACT website, which is the civictechnologists.org, if I'm not mistaken. Alliance of Civic Technologists is the name of the undertaking. They are not, as far as I'm aware, the last time I checked, they're not like incorporated. They're not a 501c3. They're not a legal entity as far as I know. They're at this point a committee to do that, I suppose you could say. So they're discussing how to move forward. Committees are fast moving and very efficient, as always. So my take, which has always been the case, autonomous cohorts should operate independently rather than through a central planning, top-down approach. So the bottom-up, hey, let's tackle problems in our locality. In some cases, I know Hack for LA has partners with local government or non-government organizations to drive projects. That's fine. That is the way that Code for America was driving local volunteer projects, to have municipal partners. And that's totally reasonable. However, if people have a real interest in pursuing a project, it may be that they pursue the project and approach a possible municipal partner later, or maybe they don't have one at all. So fully autonomous cohorts could quite literally work on projects that make sense, whether or not there's a municipal partner. That can come later, or you extend your deployable project to the people in your community or communities. So autonomy has some advantages. You are not handcuffed by a centrally planned top-down management approach, and maybe you could say messaging, marketing infrastructure, etc. So the notion was, how can we enable people to be autonomous, to work on the projects that make sense where they are, but at the same time, not continue to reinvent the wheel? So if a municipal partner were to object to this, to be anti-sharing, that would be a discussion to be had. So ideally, open source projects would be collaboration compatible, licensing, and so on. So step one is to discover who's working on projects. Which organizations are still around, which ones want to participate in the autonomous cohort transformation project, which then becomes the autonomous cohort tessellation, a mosaic of civic volunteers across the country and around the world. I just made that up, but that could work. So there's an old semantic web era set of schema, so data structure definitions, called DOAP, DOAP, description of a project, and FOAF, friend of a friend, FOAF. So if you do something as simple as fill in what it looks like an XML file, it's RDF as XML. If you create a dope.rdf and a foaf.rdf file in your GitHub repo, or if you put them on your organization website, so we could have innovateforvegas.org/dope.rdf and foaf.rdf. So if you fill in these files, these are standard, they have schema defined since the early 2000s. You can then, just like podcast RSS files, and even though they could be turned into schema.org markup in human readable HTML, the fact is RSS and the infrastructure to read them still exists. So anyone who says, dope and foaf, the semantic web is dead, you can say, well, so should RSS, but it's not going anywhere anytime soon. So these features of the semantic web are already in use by organizations like the Apache Foundation. I think it's Apache Foundation, and so on. So there are some others. So filling in a dope file for a particular project, so a description of the project, all it does is in a structured way give a description and where to find the Git or Subversion or other BitKeeper, etc., where to find the repository, where to file issues, who the maintainer is, etc. So it's a description of a project, just like it says. And then if you have your FOAF, your friend of a friend, you can fill your FOAF with other groups. And if you're familiar with the web ring concept of old, you can literally connect all of the organizations that are performing civic volunteer undertakings, former brigades, up-and-comers who didn't have to deal with the brigade kerfuffles and chaos. You don't have to be a heavyweight organization. You can be just a group of people who wants to work on projects for the sake of making their locality better. So join in, fill in your FOAF entry and connect to other people, other organizations. So you can be an individual, you can be a group. So we could connect the Innovate for Vegas Foundation as one group, and then also include Open Fresno, for example. Fellow director Mary Norris is driving basically Open Fresno, and now Code for Sacramento is joining with Open Fresno. So if you start connecting different groups, now rather than having to fill in a spreadsheet full of organizations that are non-responsive and who knows if they're still there, you take an active step, a pro-action to create this FOAF file. For example, if your podcast wants to go away, you delete the RSS file. Next time you go to read the RSS file, you get a 404, probably, missing, maybe a 403. No, maybe is it 404, 403? Which one is the permanently deleted? 404 is missing. Is it 403 is permanently deleted? Maybe 403, I think. but either way, you don't have to go around and notify, hey, update that spreadsheet. Hey, we are no longer in the Discord. Hey, you just say, hey, here was our official location, which everybody knows about because it's in our FOF that has been distributed and spidered and crawled and stored away in Sparkle database and so on. We're deleting our file. We're no longer. We're gone. So now you go through and when you re-spider, you go through your FOF file. Oh, let me see if everybody who's in my FOF, who my friends are, my quote unquote friends, let me see if they're still around. And you go and ping them and you're like, oh, that organization is not responsive. And I get a 403 back, or I get a whole server is gone, right? Maybe it's a 500 or 503 or whatever. So you use the tools and you say, oh, that organization must be gone. And maybe you put it in a dead letter pile, and you check again in 3 months or something, and eventually you just don't have to worry about them anymore. It is absolutely essential that people who are volunteering their time do so in an efficient manner. I mean, let's be reasonable. If you are a volunteer and you can spend your volunteer time doing something productive and useful, like working on some part of a real project that you and a group of people, or maybe by yourself, you're trying to make progress on, a differential unit of progress perhaps, how much of your time do you want to spend trying to track down who's working on which project, which group of people are still around, which organization still exists? Do I have to go filling in and updating spreadsheets? Here's a little secret for you. That's what computers are for. So rather than you or someone you know taking time to type, copy, paste, whatever, information into a spreadsheet and publishing a spreadsheet that is not easy to find in the first place of organizations that were culled from a Discord server. I mean, how authoritative are we getting here at this point? Instead, you start off with, okay, Innovate for Vegas is driving the Project Act infrastructure. So we can make Project Act the sort of starting point, and you add innovateforvegas.org as another group in the FOF for Project Act. And then you add Open Fresno, and Open Fresno can add Innovate for Vegas and Project Act to their FOF. So you end up with a friend of a friend. You end up with a two-way network graph, different nodes spread around the country as you add more and more. If I am not in everyone's FOF, but I am in a few, eventually we'll get found because we spider the FOFs. So we find your FOF, and then we look through there and see some new FOFs. And eventually we have a pretty good idea of which organizations are participating and are still around. And, oh, we don't know where to add ourselves to the FOF. Go to Project Act, do a pull request, add your organization, whatever the mechanism is. It should be something maybe more automated than that. So let's make that easier. And then, oh, I want to advertise the projects that we're working on. We have a new project. Oh, we have a project that is released. Now it's been archived. Why don't we make some way for people to discover projects through their descriptions? And you can include a release and a date and all these things. So all the description of a project fields are useful. You can assemble also a Sparkle database. Sparkle is a query language for RDF, Resource Description Framework. So you describe your projects and you describe your relationships with other organizations. If we can add in connection to issues, so once you know where the project and its issue, there's a whole issue field, so you know where to report issues. So the next step would be to actually parse through issues and identify issues that are interesting to a potential contributor. Civic volunteerism is not quite where it was a few years ago, so it's important to connect the people and the organizations and the projects. The people are doing real work. The organizations have goals, and the people working on these things, the people and organizations and the projects have actual importance, and sometimes they have open issues. So people spending time, organizations having goals, projects intended to meet those goals based on input of time and effort and skill from people. We should be making use of technology to connect those things, to make the most of the time and skill and inclination that people are willing to contribute to these projects. Now, because there are not as many civic volunteers showing up and participating proactively, I know here in Vegas, people would tend to show up once and then you never hear from them again. And that is a Vegas cultural staple, unfortunately. Not merely, but almost, it almost goes without saying at this point that civic volunteerism in Vegas is driven by one visit only. This is not for me. I don't want to do work. Collaboration across localities seems like a worthwhile pursuit then. So if we have one or two people, and I'll round to one, civic volunteer proactively engaged in projects and efforts in the greater Vegas area, and we have people in San Diego and Los Angeles and Fresno, Madera County. We have Madera County? Modesto County, Madera. We have people in Cleveland or Philadelphia or wherever. So we have civic volunteers in different places who may not have a cohort locally proactively engaged, making progress. Maybe there's a lull in time commitment, follow through, etc. But the fact is, once you have the terrain mapped out, once you know that there are even individuals, even one person in different places here in Vegas, for example, you make those connections. That's the starting point of collaboration. If someone says, I just need a little bit of help with this RDF schema, and if I can discover that somehow, now, should I be looking through, I know Code for America listed their brigades and projects as like a slideshow. It's almost like people have forgotten that we have computers and tools to do this. So if we can say there's a whole description of organizations that are live and doing things in the FOF infrastructure. So the FOF is a transport. You pull the data in, and now you can see which organizations are where, who, etc. Let me find all the projects that people are working on. Now let me go through and parse through the issues that people have open in GitHub or wherever. So GitHub issues, or maybe you're using BitKeeper, maybe you're using GitLab, etc., etc. So let's parse through and do a quick index of the open issues. Maybe we have a tag scheme like I need to advertise this issue far and wide. So if we can go through and automatically parse through and index open issues on projects that we can find through dope infrastructure that we locate through FOF interconnections, now someone who has some sort of RDF schema skill, who is interested, inclined, and has the time to participate, will find that if we have this infrastructure of information sharing in place. Do I have to go and register my project level registration at a marketplace? You can. There's nothing to prevent you from doing this. This is not a competition. But if someone can discover your open issue, and then they can find, they'll go to the issue and say, oh, look at that. I know exactly how to do this. And maybe they just answer it in the issue. Maybe they don't even have to do a pull request or anything. They say, oh, here's how you do it. This connects the resource, the infinite resource pool. Now, infinitely valuable. The resource pool is unfortunately very finite. The infinitely valuable resource pool of civic volunteers, people willing to contribute their time to elevate communities, to elevate projects, to contribute to the time and efforts of others, to get them across a little gap, et cetera, et cetera. So if we can actually connect people without the heavy weight of registering a project and so on. So if we can aid in discovery of issue level roadblocks, open issues, concerns, questions, etc., and connect those to people who can answer, can lend a hand. Maybe it takes them 20 minutes, but it takes them 40 minutes to figure out how to skim through a spreadsheet of broken links to find projects to look for, etc. And if you look at the Hacktoberfest infrastructure, kind of the same thing. It's really just a fire hose of potential projects to contribute to as a first timer, and that's a whole different headache to talk about another time. So we can connect organizations, the projects they're working on, the issues they are trying to solve to advance their cause, to get closer to deployment or a next release or even starting a project. Also interesting are projects that have similar infrastructure, similar challenges they're trying to tackle. So if two organizations are working on projects that are similar, might be opportunities to collaborate and share solutions, share some source code, interoperate using standard APIs. The list goes on. So civic volunteer time can be made a little bit more efficient, a little bit more, the value of the civic volunteer time can be appreciated a little bit more if we make use of the tools that we have had at our disposal for decades. Let's call it 2 decades. If we just do those things, we can actually get somewhere rather than spending our time saying, how come we don't have volunteers? We have computers. The computers can do some of the work. We can spend our time on volunteers when we have spent our time finishing, deploying, showing people what they're missing out on, the possibility where their time can be spent and why, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, once we can discover all these things, we can start advancing our causes, and we can use automation to do so. But wait, how are we going to connect these issues to potential volunteer contributors? That's still a lot of reading. If only there was some sort of artificial intelligence scheme in the air. And so there is. I've mentioned the Ollama platform. There are a few of these. There's LangChain. There are other. There's only a growing list of things. Different libraries, different platforms, different infrastructure. The whole Hugging Face marketplace / platform / infrastructure / blogs, and the list goes on. Apple just released their Elm. Is it Elm AI project? Llama 3 just came out from Meta. ChatGPT 5, I guess, is rumored to be coming out. Google has Gemma or Gemini or both. And more and more. There's only more. Snowflake is coming out with something. There are other various smaller projects. There's just a exponentially growing list of tools available. We should be using them. So I'm personally going to finally get around to trying out Ollama to see. Apparently, it's just ridiculously easy. Maybe try out Llama 3, or who knows? Maybe Elm gets in there as well. I don't know. What if we could use some machine learning? So as we are spidering FOF and dope files and indexing issues open for the dope listings, and discovering what the terrain of civic volunteer projects looks like, where people are stuck, where they're waiting for questions to be answered, etc. Make some intelligent, artificially perhaps, connection between those open issues and people who are willing to contribute their time. They have the skill, they have the time, they have the inclination. They need to know where to look and what to do. And if they're going to burn up some of that time and inclination just trying to figure out who needs their time and effort and skill and all that, they give up. I know I would. Probably have. So not only will AI come in handy for classification and summarization of items in our smart social platform and in the MyMuni project in general, and in the world. I mean, I don't know if you've heard this, but artificial intelligence is kind of becoming a thing. If we can put that to use, not only in a project, in an outward public-facing project like the MyMuni, etc., but we can also use it for things like our Project ACT initiative, which is aimed at enabling ourselves and our colleagues to collaborate, to discover, to contribute to efforts undertaken with a similar mind, like-minded individuals trying to do well by their communities with their civic volunteer time and effort. So we can use these tools to help ourselves, and I don't think we are sufficiently. It is obviously past the time to become more familiar from a practical standpoint with AI tools, right? This is something we as an organization should have been doing more if it was more than one person. So I will play that card, but it's something that we should do at the very least to enable our efforts to focus them more effectively and more efficiently so that we are not spending volunteer time trying to figure out where to find more volunteer time. Certainly with LLMs, large language models for applications, why not in these contexts? Our own collaborations and then our projects that we are developing for our communities, and we can build from there. So that's the differential progress unit discussion for today. These all seem like still aspirational, but these are super practical elements of progress The Project Act is absolutely essential. The more discussions I've had about this, the more that is obvious. I'm only concerned that the top-down approach seems to have gotten more mind share, but it is not getting any progress whatsoever as far as I can tell. So the time may be right to do a little bit grassroots, a little more grassroots efforts. We had our board meeting. We have monthly board meetings in our office hours. Office hours every Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific time, using Jitsi, which is an open source video conferencing platform. Isn't everything wonderful in the open source world? Everything is available. All you have to do is look and find. So we make use of Jitsi to show just how easy it is for anyone to form. You don't need a Zoom, no 40-minute limits, whatever. You can just do whatever you need to do. Fun fact, I interviewed the then CEO of 8x8, which is the primary sponsor of the Jitsi project, for my podcast, Radio Sunnyvale, doing business in Sunnyvale. Super great guy. Nice company, nice people. I assume it's similar today, many, many years later, 12, 13 years later. So good on 8x8 for sponsoring the Jitsi project. So yeah, Jitsi, every Thursday, 6 p.m. We have a calendar on our website, innovateforvegas.org, if you want to check it out. The link to the Jitsi meeting room, which is moderated. And you can take part anytime you like. You can talk about Project Act if you're curious. You can talk about how the Pulumi thing is going, since I'm going to work on that the moment I publish this episode. There's more, all that and more. And if you want to be on our board of directors, if you are considering forming your own organization and you want to take part in ours as a part of your journey, let's have a chat. And that is where I will leave it. So don't forget, innovateforvegas.org. Our calendar is at this moment on the homepage, but it will probably still be there, but I need a website redesign post haste. You can visit our GitHub organization, github.com/innovateforvegas, one word, no spaces. The rest you will find in the description of this episode. There are links. And from there, there's only more to do, and hopefully next week, more actual progress, and hopefully I can point you to our new website and more. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your support of local innovators wherever you are. And that's it. I'll leave you to hopefully you are listening to this on some other day than a Friday afternoon. Here in Vegas, I think it's raining. I think it sounds like it's raining. And it's supposed to sprinkle. And water in a desert, never a bad thing. Unless there's too much of it. That's a different story. Thank you. Catch you next week.